for our next session, titled Reimagining Space-Based Intelligence with AI. Please welcome Dan Smoot, CEO of Vantor, for a fireside chat with Audrey Decker, space and emerging tech reporter at POLITICO.
Oh, boy.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to host this conversation with Dan Smoot, the CEO of Vantor, and we're going to talk about how his company plans to use AI and demand for commercial imagery and all that stuff. But I would like to start and pass it over to Dan for some opening remarks, and then also talk about the recent rebrand. So Vantor used to be known as Maxar Intelligence, so I was wondering if you could talk about the decision behind that rebrand and how where the company is heading.
Great, thank you. Thanks for opening. This is an interesting format to have to twist my neck around a little bit, Sierra Bay. The rebrand has definitely been something that we've gone through. It's been quite a journey. We started about 10 months ago. And as many people in the room may or may not know, Maxar is the largest electro-optical imaging company from a commercial perspective in the world. We were taken private by a company called Advent a couple years ago as we were trying to launch our next generation constellation. In doing so, we've actually invested a tremendous amount in our new application development and taken our foundational ground capabilities and foundational data that we've been collecting over decades and really started to build next-gen applications, everything from our Raptor, which is GPS-denied landscape navigation for drones, and how to use 3D landscape, for targeting, and those are newer applications. So moving away from just being an imagery company, which we're still large at doing, but also becoming a software data and applications company, and specifically around what we're doing with AI on our site detection, object detection, site monitoring, change detection capabilities with our Sentry programs. It was to continue to drive the innovation of the company. The second reason was we actually used to build satellites as well. People may have known Maxar Space. They do large comms geosatellites and stuff, and they were rebranded as Lanteris, and we decided a definitive agreement to sell that to Intuitive Machines. And that was announced a couple weeks ago as well. So we can't really have a Maxar anymore because one's part is splitting off to be part of another company, and of course the intelligence side. And then the last piece is we have been developing ourselves about what we're going to do next with our financial side of our business. And the markets we're looking for, what's different about Vantor, and that shift has also been helping us recognize what we're doing from the financial markets perspective as well.
Great. Well, thanks for that overview. And kind of along those lines on the strategic evolution that you guys are making, if you could maybe drill down on some specific bets that you're making, how that relates to AI. I know you also announced the TensorGlobe platform. Could you also tie that to this and what that exactly does in plain English, and how it represents the evolution of where you guys are going?
TensorGlobe just doesn't define itself. There are a lot of things that we're betting on in the change, and clearly using AI and language models is going to be critically important for us to move forward. If you really think about the major bets, I talked about one, which is taking this rapid development of what we call 3D mapping. Vantor, we have the largest global 3D map in the world. We've been mapping it for decades. So actually taking that and actually driving what is the change. And think about it if you're doing post-damage assessment after a military activity. You want to understand what's changed in the 3D map. You actually have to have those models loaded in and be able to apply new imagery down and to make sure you can actually understand what that post-assessment looks like. If you had to do that manually with analysts, that takes a tremendous amount of time, and you imagine the imagery that they have to parse through to see what the change is. By actually teaching the data or learning on the data, you can actually just apply the change or apply the new imagery onto it, and it can actually adapt very, very quickly. Why that's important is if you're loading that on to be a 3D navigational capability onto a drone for a mission where GPS denial is going to happen, that 3D landscape has to be updated. And so you have to have advanced capabilities to be able to advance them quickly. The challenge is, even as good as AI is you still have to teach. You still have to learn on the data. And there's a lot of manual work that still goes into making sure you have very accurate data to build these models out. But the Raptor capabilities for doing this GPS and I capability is a huge bet for the company, because autonomous warfare is, as we're learning from the Ukraine conflict right now, is how rearmament is working in the world. The other big bet is something called Sentry, which is really looking at site monitoring, or looking at change around location. When you're seeing the same location up to 15 times a day, and you're trying to track objects on the ground, if you're trying to do that from an analyst perspective, you will be parsing through tons of information and trying to understand. But if you could actually teach, by using AI and look these language models to understand, what is that object? Is that a rail car? Is that a train? Is that a plane? What kind of plane is it? What kind of ship is it? Is it a naval ship? Is it a freighter? Is it a wooden vessel for that they might be using for immigration? These are the types of things that you're trying to teach the data, and the more we can actually automate that, the faster decision making can be made, at a government level, without having to have a tremendous amount of labor.
And in terms of where you guys are right now with using AI, space companies have talked a lot about how they plan to use it in the future, but I'm curious if you could explain, what are you using AI now for that's actually delivering, gains, and where there's still shortfalls?
Yeah, I think people underestimate in AI how important the data is. And if the data is not clean, you're going to actually have bad models. And I think we've seen that even in ChatGPT, and you've seen that in Gemini, and you've seen stuff where you actually still do queries or use stuff and you go, that's not 100% accurate yet. Because the data you're still learning on the data. And that's one of the most important things you have. So one of the things we've learned is we have this thing called georegistration, which is the accuracy of the imagery on the ground. And if you use our imagery, we know it's going to be accurate because it's the same kind of imagery that we build based on all of our sensors. But if we bring in a third-party sensor, let's say you bring in synthetic aperture radar, SAR, and we want to actually have models that are going to have that kind of data, we have to make sure the geo-accuracy is aligned perfectly. So we have to do all that testing to make sure that data aligns. Let's say we bring in a smaller sat, which has high revisit but less exquisite data. We have to make sure that's geo-registered. That we learned painfully through when the first couple of models was there's a lot of inaccuracies because we would be, meters off in regards to, well, if you're targeting or you're doing something on the ground, you can't be that far off. And so we had to make sure that all the fundamentals of the data actually lined up correctly. Then you can provide the intelligence on top of that and start teaching. Then the second thing is, like I talked about, it's teaching things what are on the ground. We ran early on, this goes back a year ago, we ran a scenario where we were monitoring a location and we were looking at mobile missile launchers. Then we took that exact same model and we put it over to where an IKEA was. And 2,200 missile launchers showed up. And it's like, well, that didn't match up, right? So what we learned is, even the data that we were applying and how you actually applying the intelligence to it, you had to make sure that it was location specific and so we're learning. Now our accuracy is down to what type of rail car, what type of vehicle. And that's just the continued evolution we're doing. We're using AI a lot in our software development for quality, for QA, making sure that our innovation is actually going faster and we're using the resources the correct way. And I think that between applying it onto the product side, but also applying it onto the product development side, has been a huge uplift for the company in how we're actually innovating faster. If you look at our Raptor product, we went from concept in January to actually GA this month in regards to actually being able to guide and sensor drones. That is a tremendous space. You have to have faster innovation to be able to develop that fast.
And in your conversations with your DoD and Intel customers, what exactly are they looking for with AI from you all? Is it speed, accuracy, automated tipping, all of it? What are the customers saying?
Yeah, I think you have the USG and then you have the international communities. They're kind of actually looking at it from two different perspectives. From the USG perspective, it is how do you actually take out the man in the middle a little bit, right? The human in the loop. And how much resource can you actually trust the data that that's accurate information? If you're providing detailed event scenario or detailed monitoring of a situation, they have to believe the data to make decisions on. And so what they're looking for is trusted data, trusted factor in regards to how we are actually making sure the applications we're producing are incredibly accurate. And that's one thing that they have to culturally shift to, is to start to trust the data. Commercial companies like ours and many others, we are actually creating these capabilities pretty rapidly. But remember, there's still commercial belief, and sometimes in governments, that they have to have that manual check, that they have to have the human in the loop to make sure that they believe in what they see. And what the government's really looking for is to make sure that they can actually trust that data and trust that environment. On the international front, they're now, if you think about specifically Europe and even Asia-Pac, but Europe, really, they're rearming. They're doing a full rearmament. They're trying to catch up over decades of being dependent on the US and really building out new capabilities. So they don't have time to go through large, bespoke, prime-based programs anymore. They have to be able to put software applications in that can drive decision-making and skip levels of history. And so they're looking for things that they can actually do as trusted partnerships in regards to how you can actually bring those solutions to them. And they know that they can trust the data of which they're going to be, ingesting into whatever system that they're going to be managing. And so we're seeing kind of two different types of flavors, between the U.S. and the international markets.
And on the U.S. side, that trust piece, I mean, how close would you say the U.S. government is to getting there?
Well, I think the U.S. has a lot of experience. I think there are a lot of programs where they've been taking these capabilities and generating outputs from. A lot of them are classified programs, and they've been adjusting some of these capabilities. So the problem is they're not interconnected. And so I think that they have developed a tremendous amount of capability in some areas, but how do you actually drive a broader capability that's interconnected, that you can actually make better decision-making on, which means, by the way, better connected across different agencies. And I think that that's the big bridge now that they're looking for commercial companies to be able to modernize away from having customized programs into standardized formats so they can actually deliver information in an accurate way. And if you really think about the revolution that's going on in regards to acquisition, that really thinking about how do you actually drive it away from custom bespoke programs into more modernized standard software platforms. And I think that's the decision-making process you're seeing in the U.S. And the trust that they're looking for, that they can actually see that it's incredibly accurate.
And I want to go back to that acquisition point in a second, but on the trust piece, I'm curious how vulnerable would you say these AI models are to possibly manipulation or adversarial spoofing or anything like that? And what are you seeing in terms of your active programs?
Well, I think the security posture of companies is still probably one of the most important things. Protecting your data has always been one of the most important things we do in the marketplace. I think we spend as much money securing our data as much as we do sometimes innovating around it, because of the fact that your point exactly, we actually deliver, we're very unique as a company. We can deliver information in an unclassified format. We can also deliver it in a classified format. And that classified data has to be protected as the most valued asset. So, and unfortunately, we live in a world where the adversaries want that data. They want to, for their own use, but also they want to be able to try and manipulate that. It's got to be top of mind for everything we do, because you're going to have the trusted data format for any of us. We have to make sure it's protected. And this is a world that moves pretty quickly to unprotected. I think that having that posture and co-developing that with governments, by the way, it's not just the U.S. government, but multiple governments, is a really important investment. And we teach that to our international colleagues, to sit there and say, hey, it's not just about getting imagery down, doing something unique with it. It's actually protecting that data stream, putting it into a format that they can use pretty effectively. You talked about TensorGlobe. That platform that we built out, TensorGlobe, has an application called Nexus in it. And that Nexus is exactly that. It's a secure database in regards to how people can actually not just access our information, but other constellation information in a secure format to be able to distribute it to their end users. And so that's the importance of investing in highly secure, highly resilient platform on information that many people would like to take advantage of.
Great. And back to acquisition reform, it's obviously a big push from this administration, and so I'm curious from your seat on the commercial side, how does government need to change to be to buy from commercial better, and what are the roadblocks now for?
Yeah, I think we've actually seen in a very short period of time, we were laughing backstage about, it's only been 10 months since the new administration took over, and some of the ways that they're driving acquisition reform. First off, I think it is about modernization of our capabilities without having to kind of reinvent and rebuy everything. If we're doing that, the bill will be too expensive for our posture in the world. I do appreciate the fact that some of the acquisition reform is around performance. Like if you sign a contract, you perform to the contract and you deliver to the contract. But also a lot of it's around innovation, how you're actually moving forward on a software format in regards to modernizing our capabilities in a secure fashion, without it having to be a bespoke FAR-15 type of program where, it's hugely larger, labor intensive, and gets them into a corner where it just becomes a ongoing, procurement process that's, never completely effective. And so I think that reform is something that we're starting to see, but there are growing pains. Some of the growing pains are some of the programs are long-tailed, longer programs that you have to be able to insert new capabilities into. And there's a bit of a cultural aspect that we have to reform inside the U.S. government as well, which is that you can trust new applications, you can trust new capabilities that the commercial industry is developing so fast to replace existing capabilities, and it doesn't have to have human in the loop for every single thing that we do. So there is a big cultural aspect that has to go with the acquisition reform to make sure that we're actually applying new capabilities and that can bring modernization much faster, if that makes sense.
And also I think we're at an interesting inflection point where we're moving, the bottleneck isn't hardware now, it's software in some ways. And so I'm curious, if the future is very software heavy, how do you think the government needs to change in the way that it buys things to accommodate for that shift?
Yeah, it is. We are definitely seeing the modernization, is much more software centric. If you think about it, application development is done at incredible speed. The compute power that still has to go beyond it, behind it, is pretty amazing as well. And I think that you're seeing the industry. It doesn't matter if it's what Google's doing or NVIDIA's doing or any of the other major providers, Amazon, and so forth. They're building the foundation for how we can deliver compute, deliver capabilities. And by the way, we're actually seeing this from a space perspective. We're seeing people start to develop, potential on-orbit data capabilities and mesh networks. Why is it? Because you can, compute to the factor faster, then you can actually transport that down. I fundamentally believe you'll always be able to compute faster on the ground because of the fact that you can modernize much faster than trying to do it on orbit. But that is one of the biggest things we're seeing. So now it's about driving the application development to that compute power. And I think that's why people are seeing this as a software forward-thinking world. Think what I was just talking about, the drone world. If you had to replace an entire drone fleet because of the fact that GPS-denied capabilities takes it basically out of effective combat, you'd be spending billions of dollars just doing replacement. Or you can actually take software, load it on the drone, take the GPS-denied off of it, and now you've got a modernized way of navigating for 3D. Now you don't have to replace the entire hardware, and you can also, by the way, you can make existing vehicles autonomous. If you look at what we're doing in the marketplace. So there's lots of things we can do from a software perspective to modernize capabilities versus have to just continually, on a hardware perspective, replace capabilities. And I think that's what the government is really leaning on. And if you look at the rearmament, what's going on, again, for people who are rebuilding or building from fresh, this is the approach that they're taking.
Shifting gears a little bit, I want to hear about the demand signal that you're hearing from customers. This administration has said it wants to lean into commercial, but also, we're seeing mixed signals. OMB proposed cuts to commercial space-based imagery. Congress may or may not reverse those cuts, but I'm just curious how you're managing, uncertain demand signal possibly, and kind of what you're hearing from your seat in the industry.
Yeah, I think it was, spring was interesting, to say the least. For those who probably read some of the articles, there were large proposed cuts in regards to certain commercial capabilities in the U.S. government. It created a lot of news, around it. What we've done as a company and what we've done working with, congressional leaders as well as the agency leaders is to really make sure that they understood what the demand signals look like. There were a lot of learning. Let's be very clear. There was a lot of learning pains that went through between new agency members, new budgeting members, command demands and stuff like that, and getting it all synced back together, for how do we actually continue to meet the national mission. I think that the commercial first rhetoric is still, that is the administration's direction to go. It's actually a definition of what is performance to pay for all that they had to continue to make sure that they're putting the money into stuff that drove value. I think we've demonstrated that back in. We are not seeing less demand. We're actually seeing an increased demand. We're seeing, if you think about some of the priorities for the U.S. government and shift in, southern border or other parts of the international community, those demands are not shrinking, they're actually increasing, and how do you actually budget to them has been kind of the challenge that we've had to go through. Right now, we actually see Congress and the Hill trying to make sure that they're plussing up the strategic elements to it. We still don't have a budget, so I really can't talk to if they've actually going to get through the final bills. But we're not operating less than we were before. We just got to make sure that it completes its cycle as we go into the 2026 budget. But I think there was a lot of lessons to be learned. It did open up a lot more conversations, I can tell you, that we've had with budgeting offices and the agencies on value. And I think that was really healthy. Because I think sometimes we take for granted when you're running these programs that you're just running these programs. And I think it's always a good checkpoint to make sure that everybody really perceives the operational capability that you're delivering. I mean, we're very proud of the fact that we haven't missed a metric since 2018. And it was a good reminder to be able to go out and present that to the government. This is what we're doing every day. And that, we have this value. And I think that'll help, continue to support the demand that's actually being asked of the government. It's busy out there right now.
And speaking of demand, I want to get an update on some of the current contracts that you're on and the programs you're working on. Luno with NGA, TAC SRT with the Space Force. In terms of Luno, could you kind of lay out where you are on that program and give us an update on how that's going with the NGA?
Yeah, the Luno program is actually a pretty encouraging program because it's the first true commercial program where they're looking at commercial capabilities to solve things like site monitoring and actually apply multi-sensor AI-enabled automation into how do we actually enable information. And we've actually been very successful. We won multiple Luno bids. One of the ones that's exciting and probably jumping out a little bit in front of the skis of the announcement is something around what we're doing with NEI, which is non-Earth imaging. It's not about looking at the adversaries on the ground now, it's also looking and trying to understand what's going on in orbit. Being able to turn your satellites and actually look at other satellites and what's going on with their orbits, what's going on with their capabilities. Actually, there's a lot of dark areas where they disappear for a little while and you can actually take imagery to do that. That's been a very interesting one that we're excited about because it is kind of a game changer in regards to when we start thinking about things like Golden Dome. But there's also been a lot of site monitoring ones, which is monitoring pop-up airports or monitoring areas in the South China Sea. And you're really filling these gaps for the government. So we've had several awards in this area. On TAC SRT, you asked about that as well. That's another one through Space Force that has actually gained a lot of momentum. Including what we've seen so far that will come back from Congress and the budgeting is more budget around doing these bespoke programs. Again, not doing big data dumps on the government to go figure out what's going on, actually using the capabilities from commercial to actually build reports out of what is happening on the ground is, these tactical capabilities that they're looking for have been nice wins. And so we're actually very pleased to see them starting to ingest lighting commercials solve these little problems.
And then could you also give us a snapshot of what you currently have on orbit? I know the Worldview Legion satellites, they're all up there. How are they performing? And then also after that program, what's next? Are you going to be doing incremental updates, new satellites? If you could give us the right there.
If anybody has the stomach to want to get into the satellite building or launching business, let me know, because come join us. Having the company build, for 7 years, a new constellation of, and I won't put the price tag out there, but quite a lot of money, and then have them on the ground and stick them on SpaceX and launch them, in 2 pairs over the last year and a half. It's been quite the experience. We were very fortunate. All 6 hit their orbit. All 6 have been delivering probably some of the most exquisite 30 centimeter, 15 centimeter high def capabilities. They're all fully functional, what we call FOC, fully operational. And so for the first time, we have the largest constellation of 30 centimeter satellites. Some of them are doing sun-sync around the poles. Others are doing mid-inclination, looking at the world a different way. We're the first to run on mid-inclination. So you can imagine in the middle of the world where there's a lot of activity. It could be in the Middle East, it could be in South China, it could be in the along the southern border. You're seeing a different perspective. So we now have a constellation of 10 very large, exquisite satellites, and right now we're very fortunate they're all operating. We are currently, we've already bought the optics for a couple more, and we are looking at the next build that we're doing right in the procurement process of that right now. And so we're looking forward to how do we actually continue to extend our constellation. And we're also looking at other types of sensor capabilities that the government has, governments have actually asked us to look at about how do we build with our advanced capabilities. We've been very successful at doing this. How do we bring some more of those to market? Could they be in smaller formats? Can they be, a little bit more revisit? We're looking at all these different options right now to continue to evolve our market.
And can you say at all, what those new capabilities the governments are asking for?
I can't really talk about some of those capabilities, but
okay.
Clearly it's, and some of the internationals are looking for the same thing, just different types of sensors to be able to pick up different types of information.
And you mentioned, I know Vantor recently got a Space Force contract, as you said, to monitor objects in space. I'm curious how you see the in-space tracking business going, and then also for Golden Dome, that could also tie into that. So, how do you see Vantor fitting in there?
Well, it's interesting. We've been very selective in regards to the information we were, we tasked with to go look at, assets. And then I think recently, if anybody has seen, the Chinese actually took an image of our space satellites taking images. And I'm like, well, if they're going to share images of us, we're going to share images of them. So, and what I was really proud of was our images of their satellites were way better than their images of our satellites. So, if you want to play this game, we'll play that game. It also talks about the fact that the key thing about low Earth orbit right now is the proliferation of satellites and stuff on orbit. It's actually becoming really important because of the fact we want to understand the movement, we understand the congestion, we understand the capabilities of what's being launched. A lot of the satellites are moving around. They're not always in the same place because the way the adversaries think about it. So I think it's a very important thing in support of the Golden Dome initiative. I think it's actually a very important capability for us to understand what the adversaries are putting on orbit today. I wish everything they were putting on orbit was just to, be driving GPS or comms or anything like that. Unfortunately, it's not. And I think that it is kind of this next frontier that we need to be incredibly aware of. And we just so happen to be able to be fortunate to be able to take those images and be able to monitor the external.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. But thank you so much, Dan, for that conversation. And thank you to the audience. Stay seated for some great conversations later.
Thanks, everybody.